So let me introduce then, and will you please welcome Roger Freitas, who will speak to us on the importance of being witty in 17th century Italy.
Thank you so much. I hope everybody has a handout they've gone around, because it will be heavily used, I think, for this. In fact, is there any way to bring the house lights up a little bit, maybe? Might make it easier to see. Beautiful. I have great faith that this is going to work. Okay. In the interest of full disclosure, I must admit that I will not be talking at all about organs or organ music here today. My area of research lies too far from these topics for me to offer anything substantial, especially in the presence of such experts. Instead, I would like to use the Italian chamber cantata, the genre I know best, to consider a more general question of aesthetics in 17th century Italian music. Traditionally, music of this period is discussed and analyzed in terms of its rhetoric, its ability to move the passions, its expressiveness, as we've obviously just heard. The tactic is certainly sound. At least from the period of the polyphonic madrigal, composers were seeking new ways of heightening the power of language, an approach famously justified by Monteverdi's theory of a second practice. And these new expressive gestures quickly found their way into instrumental music as well, Frescobaldi's toccatas, Marini's sonatas, etc. But if one considers also the social settings and functions of this music, that is, who paid for it and how it was consumed, other realms of signification begin to appear. For, as many scholars acknowledge, the elite patrons of music also prized the quality of wit, argutia, in their literature, art, and even conversation. In an article published a number of years ago, I proposed that the playful face of this phenomenon, which dominated the milieu of private entertainment, influenced the poetry and music of mid-century cantatas. Today, I will touch again on some of those ideas, but I particularly want to highlight the seriousness of the concept of wit in this period. Whereas nowadays that word usually connotes humor, especially through verbal ingenuity, several mid-Seicento writers defined wit in more profound terms, as a fundamental cognitive faculty. I will argue that traces of this attitude, and indeed of the taste for wit generally, can regularly be found in the cantata, and so likely elsewhere in the music of the 17th century. The standard locus for the discussion of Baroque wit is the poetry of Giambattista Marino, the most celebrated writer of the age. At the heart of Marino's style lies the metaphor, a figure of speech upon which he lavished more attention than anyone before. Marino's hallmark, in fact, is the paradoxical metaphor, the clever binding together of apparently incompatible ideas. This is a little bit like the antitheses Patrick was talking about, but now they're simultaneous in a way. In example 1 of the handout, I have given an excerpt from Marino's famous Canzone dei Baci, the Song of the Kisses, in which he has just portrayed a kiss as a joust, linking the traditional antitheses of love and war. He now piles on the contradictory imagery. This is quiet warfare and dear, where anger is sweetness, love disdain, and peace is found in the struggles, where one learns to die, prizes being a captive, and enjoys losing no less than victory. That stinging quarrel that injures me also aids me. It's the lips biting, of course. The tooth that now and then wounds me also heals me. The kiss that deprives me of life revives me. Wherefore I, who in dying have always a new life, injure in battle so as to be injured all the more. Though enormously popular, Marino's playful and sensuous style was never universally appreciated. In the years following his death, however, a number of apologists rose to his defense, theorizing especially his distinctive use of metaphor. The treatises of Matteo Peregrini, Sforza Pallavicino, and especially Emanuele Tesauro all shed light on the contemporary aesthetics of wit. I've given you a short bibliography of those items in example 2. To condense and oversimplify, These writers believe that the metaphor offers perceptual insights normally thwarted by the rational mind. In the traditional Aristotelian conception, the mind organizes the images it receives into discrete categories, which correspond to traits actually possessed by the objects behind those images. In other words, the organization of the mind essentially mirrors reality. Writers like Peregrini and Tesauro, however, deny the basic connection between object and mental image, and so they consider the rational categories as little more than subjective artifice. In their view, the intellectual habit of classification tends to limit perception, trapping the mind in a web of its own fictions. Loosening this web depends on a pre-rational, intuitive faculty called ingenio. Through ingenio, the mind escapes the intellect and transgresses the categories, bringing together disparate objects for comparison. The expression in language of this free mental play is metaphor. In Tesauro's formulation, ingenio sends our minds flying between one sort of thing and another so as to make more than one idea appear in a single word. To explain, Tesauro offers the following example. If you say, "The fields are pleasant," it brings to my mind nothing more than the greening of the fields. But if you say, "The fields laugh," you make me see the land as a living man, the fields as his face, the pleasantness as his happy smile. Thus, in a single little word appear all these different sorts of notions: earth, field, pleasantness, man, soul, smile, happiness. And reciprocally, in a rapid journey, I observe in the human face the notions of the fields and all the proportions that pass between these and those terms not observed by me in other instances. And this is that rapid and easy teaching that leads to delight, since it seems to the mind of the listener that in a single word there appears a theater full of marvels. Of course, the field is not a living man, and so Tesauro expressly admonishes that metaphors must not be judged by their truth, being products of intuition, but by the rarity of their insight, the very degree by which they outstrip reality. By this criterion, the most contrived, outlandish metaphors are best. They do the most to upset mental habits. This disruption takes place in stages, the first of which is simple confusion. In Pallavicino's phrase, difficult metaphors sweetly wound the intellect of the listener. Confusion soon gives way, however, to wonder and admiration, which is the aim of so much Baroque art. Marino himself famously writes that the goal of the poet is wonderment. Tesauro believes, however, that the best metaphors induce a further reaction. After confusing and then astonishing the mind, they inspire renewed reflection, a kind of intellectual digestion that can permanently change the reader's point of view. According to literary scholar J.W. Van Hook, then, paradoxical metaphors, quote, aim to stretch the epistemological capacities of the reader by exercising the mental faculties in unfamiliar ways. As I suggested, many 17th century composers who wrote for the same sorts of audiences that admired Marino seem to have inscribed something of these contemporary attitudes in their compositions. As examples, I offer today 3 cantatas, 2 by Luigi Rossi, both on text by the Roman poet Domenico Benigni, and 1 by Rossi's contemporary Giovanni Felice Sanchez on an anonymous poem. In my view, the works manifest 3 different qualities of wit, from little more than a joke to a thought-provoking reassessment of musical reality. At first glance, Benigni's poem A qual dardo il cor si deve, which is example 3 on the handout, might appear almost banal. Constructed in 5 parallel stanzas, each concluding with the same refrain line, the poem follows a general pattern found in hundreds of such texts. The subject matter, a disquisition on love, is similarly predictable. On closer inspection, however, the wittier aspects of the poem emerge. For example, the speaker appears to be pondering the question, which aspect of a woman's beauty most ensnares the heart? In each stanza, he offers a different answer: her white hand, her blonde hair, her ruby lips, her eyes, and all of this recapitulated in the closing. This sort of inquiry, a so-called questione d'amore, had a long history, going back at least to the troubadours. In the early modern period, such queries served as starting points for clever conversation and debate, both in aristocratic chambers and academic meeting rooms. The subject matter thus situates Benigni's poem in a playful ambiance. More obviously witty, however, is the refrain line, "Be silent, love knows this." For although the speaker repeatedly calls for his own silence, he always immediately ignores the suggestion and launches into a new idea until the end. This difficulty with silence, in fact, alludes to another contemporary trope, the requirement that a man, in submission to his lady, not speak of his love. Innumerable poems bemoan this enforced silence and the pain it causes. The wit of Benigni's text, then, is that the lover recognizes the propriety of silence, but he simply can't shut up. While Rossi's setting of the poem is superficially quite conventional, it also shows that he gets the joke. As the lyrical poetic form would imply, Rossi sets the text mostly in aria style. Likewise, he mirrors the stanzaic design through the technique of strophic variation and complements the textual refrain with exactly repeated music. More cleverly, the composer hints at the singer's problematic talkativeness by gradually increasing the vocal ornamentation from the first to fourth stanzas. But the real fun comes in the refrain line. Not only does the singer repeat the command taci several times, highlighting his very inability to be quiet, but he sings these repetitions to an arpeggiated motive that clearly mimics a trumpet fanfare. In other words, the singer is demanding his own silence at the top of his lungs. And I'd like to play an example of the first stanza of this piece, performed by Suzy LeBlanc, who I would say is a little too gentle with her trumpet fanfare, and the group Tragicomedia with Paul Odette as part of the ensemble. If Aqualdardo portrays a lover struggling to behave as he knows he should, Sanchez's cantata Accenti Queruli goes much further in challenging the idealized roles of amorous men and women. For this, see example 4. Formally, the poem loosely resembles Aqualdardo, with 4 roughly parallel stanzas in a lyrical mix of meters. This poem, however, lacks a refrain and concludes with 5 lines in versi sciolti, the Italian equivalent of blank verse. The real interest of the text lies in its stunning inconsistency of character. The first 3 stanzas portray the familiar image of the man who suffers from loving a distant or indifferent lady. Here, the man begs the chattering birds, stanza 1, to carry his complaint to his beloved Lydia, stanza 2, hoping she will relax her severity, stanza 3. The 4th stanza, however, lurches in a sinister direction. Instead of complaining from afar, the speaker suddenly appears in Lydia's presence, and instead of begging her for mercy, he rapes her, quote, tearing her beautiful veil, robbing her honor. With acid cynicism, the man concludes by assuring Lydia that since no one saw the rape, she will still be thought a virgin if she just keeps her mouth shut. a terrible twist on the usual trope of silence. The disjunction in this poem is obvious. At one moment, the woman is a goddess to be venerated, at another, a harlot to be mocked. Of course, this metaphor of the virgin whore turns up regularly in the period. Indeed, its popularity attests to a deep contemporary anxiety among men, much noted by scholars in recent years, about the nature of women and femininity at this time. Sanchez's music enhances this basic conceit. Again, the framework of the setting is predictable. The 4 lyrical stanzas cue aria-style music, while the concluding lines produce recitative. The genius of the cantata lies in the composer's employment throughout of the chacona bass. Probably imported from the New World, the chacona became the most popular dance in Spain around the turn of the 17th century, and it soon also appeared in Italy, where its lively, syncopated character made it a favorite for vocal and instrumental variations. More significantly, the chacona was from the beginning linked to lasciviousness and indignity. Still in 1641, in fact, Salvator Rosa could be scandalized by sacred works set to this bass, and 14 years later, the singer Otto Melani could lewdly offer to supply his patron with a few lovely Roman girls to dance the chacona. Although certainly not every instance of the bass is meant to invoke licentiousness, the poem of this cantata surely endorses such a reading. By introducing the chacona from the start, while the man is still radiating courtesy, Sanchez converts the diachronic disjunction of the poem into a synchronic metaphor. That is, at the same time the singer is declaring reverence, the bass line is already broadcasting sex. This incongruity is finally resolved in the 4th stanza when the man's change of character comes like a foreshadowed punchline, an effect further emphasized by Sanchez's extended melisma for the torn veil and long dissonant cry on O. Accenti queruli, then, is hardly a simple imitation of Monteverdi's Zeffiro Torna, which it otherwise resembles. Sanchez's work fully participates in the dark wit of the virgin whore. And again, I'll play an example here, a little bit from the 1st stanza, and then I'll skip to the 4th. This is Maria Cristina Kier and Concerto Soave. There's the chacona. And then skipping to the 4th stanza, you have the text. My last example of paradoxical metaphor is both the most complex and, I believe, profound. The wit of Benigni's poem Lasciatemi qui solo, which was example 5, lies not so much in the sense of its words as in their form. The text consists entirely of versi sciolti, punctuated by a refrain, traits that mark the poem as a recitativo or recitative soliloquy. The first line, Lasciatemi qui solo, leave me here alone, obviously conjures the most famous recitative soliloquy of all, Monteverdi's Lament of Arianna, whose poem, by Ottavio Rinuccini, begins Lasciatemi morire, let me die. Benigni's poem is clearly an homage. But in fact, the poet diverges subtly from his model. At 31 lines, Benigni's poem is less than half as long as Rinuccini's. More importantly, Benigni's refrain recurs far more frequently and regularly, including at the end of the poem. Indeed, the refrain almost seems to divide the text into stanzas, along the lines of A qual dardo, for example. The poet here appears to be blurring the boundaries between versi sciolti and closed forms, between the recitational and the lyrical, between speech and song. The wit lies in his fusion of these nominally opposed modes of communication. From the opening, Rossi announces his intent to develop Benigni's paradox. First, Rossi underlines the poet's citation of the Lament of Arianna, a copy of which Rossi possessed. Like Monteverdi, Rossi begins with a long accented dissonance on lasciate. Instead of Monteverdi's minor second, B flat against an A minor triad, Rossi chooses a tritone, C sharp against a G minor triad. For Rossi too, then, this cantata is a tribute. But Rossi prosecutes Benigni's metaphor primarily at the level of meter. After the first few bars, the listener becomes aware that rather than the recitative of Monteverdi's setting, Rossi has chosen a triple meter aria style. That choice by itself astonishes. Versi sciolti nearly always prompted recitative, with Monteverdi's work as the model. But Rossi further complicates the matter. Although the triple meter is nearly continuous, with the brief exception of the setting of lines 22 to 26, the metrical effect is hardly regular. Indeed, Rossi repeatedly undermines his meter, creating passages of remarkable ambiguity, and for these I've given you a few little excerpts in example 6. In the opening measures, for example, he writes a static bass in combination with long vocal notes that often ignore strong beats. He also liberally employs hemiola, as in measures 16 to 19, where 4 measures of 3/4 start to sound like 5 measures of 2/4, finally jolted back on track in measure 20. In measures 115 to 117, this is 6C, the hemiola is further complicated with rapid stile concitato, or repeated note declamation, thoroughly overthrowing the sense of 3/4. Finally, the surprise appearance of real recitative in measures 141 to 51 temporarily adds to the confusion, a state that Rossi extends through the insertion of a single 4/4 measure, measure 155, marked there with an asterisk, just after the return to triple meter. The intent of these unusual passages seems clear. Just as Benigni had written a poem in blank verse that approached the lyricism of closed forms, so Rossi writes a triple meter aria that repeatedly approximates the declamatory freedom of recitative. And here, again, I'll play a couple of examples from this piece. The first one starts at the beginning and covers both examples 6A and 6B. The second one will start a little bit before 6C and then include that. Unfortunately, there's no commercial recording of this piece. That means that I had to record it, and that's very bad. Chanticleer was many, many years ago, and so it's not good singing, but hopefully it will give you a sense of what's going on here. The continuo playing is fantastic, of course. That's by Chris Bezzaino. Begin again just a little before 6C. This strange mix of musical styles, a truly Marinistic union of opposites, may at first have elicited surprise and maybe even a little confusion among its listeners, followed perhaps by wonder and admiration. Again, as I have suggested elsewhere, such violations of conventions pepper the cantata repertoire and often, I believe, signal the notion of wit. But the paradox that informs Lasciatemi qui solo seems ready to surpass the condition of wonder and, as Tesauro hoped, stretch epistemological capacities. The genre of the cantata was, of course, born from the monody that launched the Baroque period in music. And this monody itself proceeded from a paradoxical metaphor, famously expressed by Jacopo Peri as recitar cantando, or reciting, speaking in song. Fascinated by ancient Greek music, the earliest monodists aimed to collapse the categories of speech and song, creating an integrated language of rhetoric amplified by music. Several decades later, Benigni and Rossi seem bent on collapsing two more categories, this time recitative and aria. Instead of recitar cantando, Rossi here writes what might be called recitar canoro, or speaking in sweet melody. Rossi's imitation of Monteverdi's renowned lament thus advances the argument that aria style, carefully written, can assimilate the power of recitative. And so the implied metaphor, speaking melody, not only stuns its listeners, it also urges a change in the way they think, preparing them to accept the aria as a worthy vessel of expression. Of course, that very development, the rise of the aria, was taking place over Rossi's lifetime. The metaphor embodied in this cantata, then, parallels a real expansion in the conception of musical reality. Now, I'm the first to admit that not every cantata responds equally well to my approach here. Some works seem straightforward and simple, others venture little beyond humor. What seems undeniable, however, is the significance of wit, playful and serious, in the tastes of the Baroque. Tesauro writes at length about metaphor in dance, drama, and the visual arts, and even refers to an unusual mix of architectural elements as a metaphor in stone. That the quality of argutia should be absent from the music of the period, and especially the music for the elite, seems to me unlikely. While I would never deny the importance of expression in this music, I now also keep my eyes peeled for traces of the paradoxical metaphor. I even begin to wonder whether wit and expression are two more categories that need collapsing. In any case, I believe that the very awareness of wit can expand perceptions of Baroque music, of whatever genre, and perhaps unlock Tesauro's theater of marvels. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Who would like to open the discussion? Are there questions or comments that any of you would like to make? We have time. I'd like to ask you, you drew the comparison early on between Patrick's antitheses and your paradoxical metaphor.
Yeah, that just happened off the top of my head.
Good. To say that the metaphor happened simultaneously and the antitheses were more sequential. And I think those of us who are more adept at keyboard than in vocal music would recognize this sequential antithesis. And I'm wondering, and maybe the question is for those of you out here more than for Roger, what happens with this paradoxical metaphor when you take the words away? And try and find an analogy in instrumental music for this. Now, you did have a simultaneity in that Chacona bass. But without the text that we were dealing with, nobody would have noticed anything about that. Any ideas about this out there? Yeah.
I don't know if it's an idea, but I was thinking about this, an example more than an idea, is one piece I will play tonight from the Libro di Capricci, Frescobaldi, the Capriccio Cuckoo. And of course, the theme is the minor third, the cuckoo theme, everybody knows it. And the interesting thing that happened in the piece, that is published in full score, that you have practically 3 parts of very, very, very strict counterpoint from the beginning to the end. And then the soprano part arrives sometime with kind of very well-balanced irregularity to play the minor third of the cuckoo. And so I think this is a kind of wit because when you play this, you cannot absolutely play the piece using the same technique for the 3 polyphonic part and the cuckoo. Because if you use the same articulation and same technique, what happens is that the cuckoo is lost in the middle of the complexity of the counterpoint. And so the only solution you have to play, or what I will try to do, maybe it doesn't work, you will tell me, it is to play the 3 parts in a very serious and legato counterpoint style, like a motet, and the cuckoo more articulated and more free. And so you have the contrast, and again, it's a kind of antithesis between 3 ingredients that are together, but it's the only way to make the 2 ingredients working. I think this is one of the first examples, 1624, but I think it could be a good example for instrumental music of this concept.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What a wonderful answer.
Yeah.
What did you have to say?
What I was going to say is that for me, the key in finding these things, text comes into play, but the real thing is noticing when the conventions are violated in some way. So, and that's exactly what's happening there. It looks like on the surface it's just a beautiful contrapuntal piece of strict counterpoint, but something doesn't fit in this other part. I think the same thing can apply. Once you know what's normal for the genre that you're playing or singing, then you find the thing that is really out of place. That's the moment to question, okay, is what's the purpose of this? It could be an expressive purpose. It could also be a witty purpose, and those 2 things don't necessarily have to cancel each other out. But that's where I always would look first, violation of convention.
Patrick.
Yeah, to follow that up, isn't the cuckoo an interloper that lays its eggs in the nest of other birds? So this cuckoo is eating the counterpoint.
Yes.
Wandered in.
People would know that association.
Yeah, that's great.
Very good. Other comments? Yes.
Your comments on meter were very interesting, I thought, because you were pointing out 2 different, it seems to me, reinterpretations of meter. One in which there are 2 beat phrases laid on top of a 3 beat scaffolding or something. But then some others in which the sense of meter is totally loosened. And it reminds me that we tend to, when we look at early music, bring certain 19th century, let's say, norms to what we're looking at. The idea that a bar line has certain meanings for articulating phrases, 2-bar phrases, 4-bar phrases, so on. But as certainly as late as Bach, James Bach, the music sometimes gets a half bar off. And we probably all know some examples of that. And that's not an example of wit there, it's just that it's a compositional convention of simply how you notate the music. You're not thinking halfway through the piece, oh, he's half a bar off now. And right. Everything very differently because the return now happens in the middle of the measure. That's not what's going on.
Right.
Here it's interesting that the metric looseness or freedom is dramatized in a certain way by it not matching up with the harmonies.
That's right. And it's not only, that's exactly right. I would say what distinguishes this especially is that even if you don't know where the bar lines are, even if you're just listening along, you can lose the sense of triple meter, even though it's all notated in triple meter wherever the bar lines happen to fall. And in fact, at this time, in triple meter especially, they're quite irregular with when they decide to make a bar line. Still, you can lose track of what happened. Where are we metrically? Oh, okay, and we've kind of come back around again. Sometimes more, sometimes less of that effect, but it is unusual. Normally, you think of these little triple meter arias getting going, and they're all very lyrical and charming and fun, and that's not what's happening in this piece.
Other comments, questions?